Good morning, everyone. Today, with ringing our peace bowl, we affirm our collective hope for peace. We acknowledge that these lands that we love are the ancestral lands of the Yavapai people, the Wipukepas, the Tolkepayas, the Cuevcapayas, and the Yavapai. We also ring out once more the bell of freedom. On June 19th, 1865, 156 years ago, Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, to declare the end of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery in the United States, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. It's this day that has traditionally been celebrated as Juneteenth in Texas to mark the end of enslavement, an occasion that other 45 states commemorate, some on different days and under various names, including Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, Liberation Day, and Jubilee Day. Let us listen to "Oh, Freedom." Wow, what a history. Good morning and welcome. For those of you who are visiting, I am Reverend Patty Willis, the fortunate woman who serves Granite Peak Unitarian Universalist congregation as their minister. A congregation, this congregation, knows how to find enjoyment even in a pandemic. We are all blessed as well to live in such a place of beauty. This is our mission statement. We are a compassionate spiritual community that celebrates diversity, nurtures the personal and spiritual growth of all ages, shares our gifts, promotes justice for all, and serves the world we live in. This morning, we give great thanks to Reverend Anthony Johnson, who will be speaking to us about Juneteenth. We also give thanks to Heather Knowles for her artistic and technical direction, for Mary Lou Prince for musical direction, and for our choir, our wonderful choir, the Granite Peak Singers. After our service today, we will resume, and we are hoping there is no big accident today. That was interrupted by an internet outage all over the region. You can contact us in the chat and through the website at prescottuu.org. Today, I will also be at our building at 3 p.m. to talk with anyone who shows up. This morning, we light the chalice, a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, with the promise of the Emancipation Proclamation and the jubilation that the announcement of freedom brought to the many people who were suffering under enslavement. As Juneteenth occurs this Saturday, at the end of a year of action following the murder of George Floyd, I believe that Howard Thurman, a visionary theologian, would have found promise in this moment. We light our chalice with the promise of Howard Thurman's words. "Listen to the long stillness," he wrote. "New life is stirring, new dreams are on the wing, new hopes are being readied. Humankind is fashioning a new heart. Humankind is forging a new mind. God is at work. This is the season of promise." With this flame, we show our commitment to play a role in fulfilling that promise here in Yavapai County and in the world. I will light our chalice. In the beauty of the promise, let us sing together a song that is thought to be connected with the Underground Railroad and gives words to the transformative power of the rivers of baptism and the rivers that threw the dogs of pursuers off the tracks of the enslaved escaping to freedom. With reverence for those roots, let us sing, Wade in the Water. And now let us say our covenant together. Love is the doctrine of this congregation, the quest for truth its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, thus do we covenant together. And now I invite you again into the sound of our bell, and let us breathe together. Let us breathe in and breathe out and feel our feet firmly on this earth that has supported our lives thus far, this earth that is in such need of water. Let us consider the earth down through the many layers to that fiery core and the ever-changing geology that is just beneath our feet. We come together each week, each of us bringing joys and sorrows, and this is no exception. Among all of those unspoken joys and sorrows in your hearts, Dan Reardon's mother, Constance Mary Reardon, died on June 3rd. Richard Moorer has been hospitalized during this past week for knee difficulties. And Jackie Hurst continues to mourn the loss of her Jerry last week, her companion of 40 years. And then this week marks 1 year since Annette Olson's death and 1 year of mourning for Jack Stanton. We continue to hold the many who are in the process of recovery from illnesses. We hold them and hope that our holding them can bring them encouragement in the difficult times. I visited Judy Davis yesterday, and she is doing better. And unlike what I said yesterday, I was misinformed. You do need reservations in order to visit her. We also hold Eunice Lovejoy, Janer Eldridge, Karen Anderson, and Peter Eldridge, and all those around him supporting him. And let us hold Karen and Merle Hagberg, Pocahontas and Jean Gertler, although far away, are still within the arms of our community. Let us hold all those who are grieving children, partners, siblings, parents, recognizing that grief takes time. In joy, we also celebrate Joanne and Mike Fogel's 65th wedding anniversary and Anna Bess and Jim Robinson's 59th. We also ask for blessings on Joanne Fogel, who had a fall this past week. May all who are within the arms of this community feel love around them. This week in the world, we also remember the shootings at Pulse nightclub in Florida 5 years ago that killed 49 people. And on this day, as we remember Juneteenth, we acknowledge the promise of freedom that we still must work to fulfill. And let us breathe again together. I will ring the bell, and after that, please say the names of any who are on your hearts and minds, and then we will enter a time of silence, after which I will offer a meditation prayer. Spirit of life, we are here showing up once again. We give thanks for the sound of the ponderosa pines that sounds so much like the sea. We give thanks for the natural world that holds us up in difficult times. We give thanks too for all those within this congregation who have reached out to the people around them and lifted them up in difficult times. We ask for blessings around all those who are suffering and they are suffering alone. Help them to feel that a community is with them. We ask for blessings on this country. We ask for ways in which we can serve and become more hospitable, that we can work to eradicate the racism that we find sometimes around us. For all these things, we give thanks and we send our hope into this universe. Amen, and may it be so. And now let us join Lena and Russ Erickson singing Walking, Walking with You.
Walking with you is my prayer.
This week, I have been wanting to give special thanks to all of the buddies who've been hard at work during this past year. Thank you. Thank you. Now, this is the time in our service when we normally gather the offering in the sanctuary, which we think might be happening again in September. At this time, we remember that this congregation is supported by our generosity. To give during this distance time, please go to prescottuu.org and you will find a donate button on the bottom left-hand side. This link is also available in our chat. This month's Seeds of Support will go to Quixote's Garage, a safe, welcoming space located in Sam Hill Alley. I hope that you go visit that place. It's between Granite and McCormick Streets, and there they provide daytime hospitality for anyone who needs a place to relax out of the cold or out of the heat. And now I invite you to sway and sing along to Go Down Moses. Wow, that was wonderful. Today, as we remember that historic day in United States history, let us listen to the words of two sages who were instrumental in bringing freedom. Frederick Douglass said, "I prayed for freedom for 20 years, but received no answer until I prayed with my legs." And Harriet Tubman, who said, "I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man should take me alive. I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted, and when the time came for me to go, the Lord would let them take me." Now we will listen to a song that inspired the civil rights movement. Keep Your Eyes on the Prize.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you will hear from Reverend Anthony Johnson. Thank you, Reverend Anthony, for being with us today.
Greetings and blessings. I welcome you in the name of the ancestors upon whose shoulders I stand. And I welcome you in the name of all that is sacred and holy for you. It is indeed a pleasure and honor for me to be sharing this time and space with you. You know, my personal appreciation for who we are as UUs is best summed up in the opening words from my siblings in Ireland, the UU Church of Dublin. They say, "We do not ask what you believe or expect you to think the way we do, but only that you try and live a kind and helpful life with the dignity proper to that of a human being." So welcome all who believe that religion is wider than any sect and deeper than any set of opinions. Welcome all who might find in our friendship strength and encouragement for daily living. Or as I like to say, it's got to mean something. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Today's sermon is entitled Freedom Day, or Juneteenth, as it is perhaps better known. It is a holiday, dare I say, a holy day, celebrating the emancipations of African Americans who had been enslaved in the United States, and specifically the state of Texas. So today in this sermon, I'm going to share some of the history of the recognition of the day slavery was officially outlawed in the state of Texas 2.5 years late or later, and the meaning of freedom in the context of today's time of tumult, today's time of racial reckoning and reconciliation. I imagine it was a hot, sunny June Day in Galveston, Texas. June 19th, to be exact. The year was 1865. This sunny day, like all those that preceded it, was a day when you woke up at sunrise and you knew you would be working without pay until sunset. Without pay, without recognition, and in constant threat of your life being taken or your children being taken away. These were some of the realities of this peculiar institution known as American slavery. A cloud of dust rose in the eastern Galveston sky as a large group of horsemen approached. Turned out to be Union soldiers. They rode in and stopped at the master's house, and all the slaves were called in from the fields. A tall, lanky white officer, General Gordon Granger, had an announcement to make. He proclaimed that as of this day, slavery was outlawed in the state of Texas, and that all slaves in Texas were free of their masters forever. I can only imagine the shock, the disbelief, and the joy that poured from their eyes, from their hearts, and their collective being and beings. Because Abraham Lincoln, of course, had actually proclaimed in the Emancipation Proclamation, slavery was outlawed in all slaveholding states. Again, almost 2.5 years earlier, on January the 1st, 1863. Texas was the most remote of the slave trading states, the slave states. Very few Union troops were there, and it took the very presence of these troops for the freedom of Black folks to even approach being real. Speaking of being real, a little historical context, I feel, may be in order to some insight into why Black Lives Matter and their white allies are calling for this today and into the road that our country has been traveling down for a very, very long time. The history reads like this. Slavery in the United States was the legal institution of human chattel slavery, comprising the enslavement primarily of Africans and African Americans, and it existed from the founding of the country in 1776 until the passage of the 13th Amendment in January of 1865. I mentioned before, we've heard the phrase peculiar institution, because this was like no other type of slavery in human history, where one could buy oneself out of slavery or work oneself out of slavery or marry oneself out of slavery. No, not in this case. It was like being an orphan among thousands of orphans for generations. Now, these orphans may have actually known who their mother was, but had their mother and father taken from them, or themselves being snatched from their mother or father at a moment's notice or with no notice at all. Their feelings didn't matter. They did not matter. After all, they were not people, they were property. Just imagine, if you can, for a moment, what it must have felt like to be a slave in America. And we're going to call in some major help to help us do that. Frederick Douglass said. There were no beds given to the slaves, unless one coarse blanket be considered such. And none but the men and women have that. This, however, is not considered a very genuine privation. They find less difficulty from the want of beds than from the want of time to sleep. For when the day's work in the field is done, the most of them having their washing, mending, and cooking to do, and having few or none of the ordinary facilities for doing either of these. Very many of their sleeping hours are consumed in preparing for the field the coming day. And when this is done, old and young, male and female, married and single, drop down side by side on one common bed, the damp floor, each covering himself or herself with their miserable blankets, and here they sleep till they are summoned to the field by the slave driver's horn. Frederick Douglass from Narrative of a Slave, his story. Thank you, Mr. Douglass. This is our history, this history, and I believe is not shared or discussed enough. From our country's founding in 1776, it is legal to enslave Black people by law until 1965. Boy, I keep saying that 19, tied it into the civil rights era. How could we possibly be 100 years beyond 1865 still be talking about the same thing? MLK comes up. His quote about, this is no time for the gradualism. This is no time for the drug of gradualism, he said. But it was on the book. The law was on the books until 1865. Let's keep that straight. You know, we had an American Revolution in between there, 1775 to 1783. Quick digress. I know many of you may have heard the name Crispus Attucks. One of many stories of irony throughout our history, was the first person to die in the Boston Tea Party. Was an African-American Bostonian. Our Constitution was written in 1789, and it never mentioned the word slavery, not one time. And this document guaranteed power to the slave states by counting enslaved people as 3/5 of a human for taxation and representation purposes. You know, 1/3 more electoral votes and representation in the Congress would have been available if enslaved people had been counted the classic way, one person, one vote. Sound familiar? Even past 1965, what's the news now in 2021? Voting fraud, voter suppression, voter integrity affecting Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. The beat goes on. Controlled by Southerners. I ask my friends out there who look for threads of systemic racism to take a deep breath and do some research. All of this affected all the laws, all the speakers of the House, all the Supreme Court justices. And add to all that, the Southern states demand that slave states and free states must be equal in number. And that was in place until 1850. January 63, Brother Abe, Mr. Lincoln, said enslaved people are free if they live in a slave state. There are many, many discussions around whether this was a military decision and not a moral one. Much debate. What I know for sure is it did not free all enslaved people. But the Emancipation Proclamation, the recognition of this date, it was officially outlawed in the United States. And it wasn't until 2.5 years later, on June 19th, that my siblings in Galveston got the word. So, quick snapshot. In April of 1864, the Senate passed the 13th Amendment. The House passed it in January of 1965. December, it was ratified by the states. Abolition of slavery. Yeah. It abolished slavery with one exception, my friends. Except punishment for a crime. Except punishment for crime. So there's a distinct, direct historical thread, a very real line through convict leasing to what we call today mass incarceration. Digress and ask you to watch the documentary called 13th, or even Steven Spielberg's movie Lincoln for more background. So Lincoln was assassinated in April of 65. Yeah. By the way, 3 states refused to pass the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. Delaware, Kentucky, and Mississippi. And it also took another couple more constitutional amendments, the 14th and the 15th, to promise Black folks true freedom or to take a shot at it. Number 1, the 14th said we had equal protection under the law. That was in 1990. That was in 1868. Number 2, the right to vote, quote, shall not be denied on account of race. February of 1869. How does that resonate today? You know, that was more than 100 years ago, and yet we remain in a state of the need for racial reconciliation and reckoning and reparative justice. Dr. Homer Jack, the director of the Division of Social Responsibility of the Unitarian Universalist Association, referred to the issue as reparation investments, he called it. And his call echoes my support for African American reparations, restorative justice for the African American community. Take your head off your checkbook. It's not about writing no checks. Not for you. If the government would have fulfilled their promise, 40 acres and a mule for some 40,000 freed African American slaves, experts say amounts to today's money, some $640 billion. The failure of our government to honor that obligation has had and continues to have long-term financial implications that are still with us. And for me, it lies at the crux of the matter. So bless H.R. 40 finally coming out of committee. By the way, Delaware finally did ratify the 13th Amendment outlawing chattel slavery in 1901. Kentucky came around in 1976. In Mississippi, the place of my birth, in the year 2013. Mississippi, the birthplace of America's music. You know, they used to have a saying that they would threaten slaves from Alabama and Georgia, the Carolinas and Virginia, that if you don't start acting right, I'm going to send you to Mississippi. Yeah. 'Tis my birthplace. Another statistic for you just to sit on. By the way, which state do you believe had the most slaves? Try New York. And what do Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Andrew Johnson, and Ulysses S. Grant have in common, other than all being ex-presidents of the United States? Yes, they were all slave owners in their lifetime. This is just the truth. This is the truth. This is in the fabric of our society, our cultural DNA. President Joe Biden's his recent speech on May 31st, he marked the commemoration of the massacre of hundreds of African Americans in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the section of Tulsa known as Greenwood. Just one of many, many untold stories of African American history, resilience, fortitude, stories waiting to be told. Our history books did not recognize that this horrendous Holocaust, this racial massacre even existed. It was like it never happened. The bombs were never dropped. The 35 blocks of homes and businesses were never there. I offer that we must remember, we must recognize as a country, as a society, and as a faith, we must own all of our history, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. This is the only path to true reconciliation and healing, that place we call the beloved community. The only path, I believe, to true reconciliation and healing for all of us. Freedom Day, dare I say. You know, I may not be able to define it, but I will know it when I see it. And I will call it out like my ancestors did that day in Texas. Freedom Day, Freedom Day, Freedom Day. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. Ashe. Our closing words today are words from the great W.E.B. Du Bois. It is said that he said these words while he was holding the first issue of the Crisis magazine in his hand. You may recall one of Du Bois' famous quotes about the greatest problem of the 20th century is the color line. But today, we chose the following Du Bois quote. Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow.
Thank you, Reverend Anthony. Thank you for being with us today. And now we will extinguish our chalice and we'll move on to our annual meeting. For those of you who are not wanting to attend our annual meeting, I hope that's not many of you, you can join our chat room. So now let us extinguish our chalice together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.